Hello and welcome to Sam Not So Wise. My name is Sam. A very tired Sam today, as I have just been spending the last few days showing my brother and his partner around Iceland, the wonderful sights of Iceland, at least a small part of it because there is so much to see here. But anyway, it is now July, so that means one thing. That means we have to wrap up the month of June and what I read. It was another kind of lean month in terms of numbers, but that's okay. I don't really care about that. Still plenty to talk about. I'm going to talk about the 3 books and a couple of short stories that I have read and finish off, as I usually do, with next month's TBR, or this month's now as it is. So with that and much further ado, let's wrap up June. So June started off by finishing the Dandelion Dynasty with Speaking Bones. Now I wanted to do this while book 3 was still fresh in my brain, and the 2 books were also conceived as one book but split into 2 due to the size, because you know they are both 1,000 pages long and no book can be 2,000 pages long, I don't think. I can't obviously talk much about this due to it being a book 4, but I did do a full series review of the Dandelion Dynasty on the channel last week, so I'll pop a link in the description if you want to know more about my feelings on this series as a whole. But Speaking Bones leaves off right where book 3 ended, then being split in 2 of course, and it starts off quite slowly as tension is kind of ramped up towards the grand finale of the book and the series as a whole. This was fairly tedious at times, particularly in the passages in which there's a section where there's a survival situation going on, and I understand that it was needed, it was necessary to kind of work our way out of the fix that our characters had gotten themselves into and get to a new destination so the story can move along, but it just took a really long time and I was just a little bit bored, to be honest. Excuse me. One of the series' main strengths though is the political maneuvering. Throughout the whole series, that has been a huge part of what I have loved about the series, and this was certainly a highlight of the earlier stages of this book too. So, but also, moving on, my previous complaints of too many flashbacks and repetitive plot beats were still very much on display as we got into the bigger action of the story. One particular battle sequence I can think of comes to mind, in which these flashbacks felt like they took forever and were just so dense with kind of detailed descriptions of engineering, and it just completely disrupted the flow, and I was just getting a little bit frustrated with constantly going back and finding out the minutiae of every single machine that was, you know, invented for this war. Now this book though ends brilliantly and wraps up the series absolutely beautifully in my opinion. The thematic work that is built up throughout the series just comes to a head where decisions on kind of the morality of leadership and whether to sacrifice people for the greater good is justifiable against kind of a pure evil. There's some things such as the weight of guilt, reconciling differences, the usefulness of doubt in rule in the future, and so much more. And it's just truly explored in magnificent depth. He really goes into the heart of these problems. And what's wonderful is these are explored from all angles as well, with no kind of definite answers, and it just leaves the readers to make up their own mind on the decisions that were made throughout this story, which is, I think, is a beautiful thing. You're not kind of being given spoon-fed an idea that you have to take on board. We really do explore all of the thematic work from all angles to leave it up to the reader, which is magnificent for me. Also, this book, there are so many loose ends that are tied up in very satisfactory ways, from the biggest of the players in the series down to all of the side characters, really. Everybody gets their arcs filled. So for me, this final book kind of sums up the series. I have so much respect for this series and this book. Especially the thematic work and the world building is excellent, and the characters are brilliant, at least after the first book. But ultimately, the reading experience is kind of dampened for me by the kind of awkward storytelling techniques, the constant flashbacks. So this book capped off for me what was a great series, but that has a lot of flaws and won't be making it into my top 10 series of all time, but one that I definitely will remember fondly. So the second book I finished was Godkiller by Hannah Kana, and this was the pick for my book club that I run here in Reykjavik. So I knew nothing about this book going into it, just a couple of kind of murmurings of enjoyment from some YouTubers. I can't even remember who, I just remember hearing that some people quite liked it. So the story opens up with a young girl and her family being offered up to a fire god. The young girl manages to live thanks to ties to a god of the sea. This is like no spoilers, it's literally the prologue, by the way. We then jump around 20 years into the future, where gods have become illegal in this country, and our young girl protagonist is now a fully grown woman, and she is a god killer on a path of revenge. She is joined by a 12-year-old girl on her own path of revenge and self-discovery, who is kind of attached to a young god of lies, a very cute character. There is also a retired knight who is pulled back into service for one last desperate mission. So these characters eventually cross paths with the same destination in mind of a wrecked city that harbours potential gods that could help them in their respective missions. So that's it for the plot without spoilers going further, and this is kind of a charming and quite short book with a touch of perhaps slightly overforced grit. It doesn't really push any particular boundaries in terms of plot or characters or thematic exploration or writing style in general, but it is a solid story, especially considering that it is a debut novel from Hannah Kana, and certainly tugs at the heartstrings in places. Like I said before, it's kind of quite warm and fuzzy in many ways and cute. So Godkiller does make use of many well-used tropes, which is not a bad thing, but it doesn't necessarily take them in any new direction. So it is kind of classic-ish fantasy in that way. You get the tropes, which is absolutely fine. You're not going anywhere particularly new, so it is a comfortable reading experience if you're, experienced in reading fantasy. As a result, many of the plot beats were kind of predictable or maybe unsurprising, but there were a couple of occasions where I was a little bit surprised in a pleasant way. Also, for those who like kind of LGBTQ and or disability representation, this book certainly has you covered. Whilst thematic work wasn't necessarily central to the book, we did explore some great themes in here, along the lines of the obvious one being revenge. Innovation versus tradition is key in here as well, exploration of identity for most of the characters, and unwavering loyalty and what that does to a person. So this to me was kind of my favourite word at the moment, whelming. It was all right. It existed, it was there, it was fine. Nothing particularly new or exciting for me, or maybe not for any other maybe experienced readers of fantasy. You might not find anything particularly new, but it may be really good for those who are new to the genre or younger readers. So yeah, a really solid entry. I'm not going to be continuing with the series. I forgot to mention this is a book one in a trilogy. So yeah, it was good. I'm glad I read it, but I won't be continuing along with the series. So the third full final length novel that I read in June was Anathem by Neil Stephenson. I don't know how to say that word because it's a mixture of anathema and anthem. So Anathem, Anathem, I don't really know. Anyway, this one by Neil Stephenson, which did just sneak into July, but I don't really care about that, especially as it was a buddy read with my good friends Bart and Whitney, our fourth buddy read, and it was a great one to read with those wonderful people. It is kind of difficult to talk about this book because there is just so much going on, but what I will say is that it is a rather unique book. Not really read anything like it before, so that immediately made it just extremely interesting and a great reading experience for me. So what is this book about? I'll try my best to tell you. So this is set on a world that is very similar to ours but isn't Earth, and we follow a first-person perspective of an 18, 19, maybe 20 years old at the end man called Erasmus. So the story does take a year or two, I believe, I'm not exactly sure. And he lives in a place called a consent, in which a small society that is almost kind of monk-like in nature, they live in a separate walled community to the rest of the world. And there are many of these consents around the world, but we follow Erasmus in his. Now, the purpose of these consents ostensibly seems to be of learning in a variety of forms and kind of maintaining knowledge, as their seclusion from the outside world keeps them at arm's length from anything that happens outside of their walls. So this society has been in existence for thousands of years, close to 4,000 years, and they kind of observe the outside's rises and falls of society through the years. If you think about it, 4,000 years is a really long time to be kind of secluded and watching what's going on. So they've kind of witnessed basically almost apocalyptic situations, but also huge rises in tech. Now, these knowledge monks stay consistent themselves and spend much of their life just kind of discussing philosophy and science. It's kind of cozy in a way for them. At around the halfway mark in the book, though, after a gradual build-up of mystery around some strange occurrences, the world just completely opens up and a grander, almost adventure story plays out, in which the stakes are as high as potentially involving kind of humanity's ultimate survival against a threat. Now, I won't say much more than that because, you know, spoilers, and the gradual revealing of what's really going on is really what's at the heart of this book and this story. So this book is very much a book of two halves, where I personally felt the first half was a lot better than the second. Now, the first half felt just impeccably realised, with the world building just being incredibly deep, and the atmosphere was just kind of very tangible. I really felt like I was there with them. It was very well realised, and it felt like what Stephenson really wanted to put his heart into, and therefore maybe the most thought out section of the book. Now, the second half felt like it had a lack of direction. Now, I think he had the final beats of the story decided in his head, but didn't really know how to get there. And like I said, he wanted to focus more on this society that he had built. So therefore, there were kind of quite a lot of plot holes and plot conveniences. They just started littering the story in the second half, and unnecessary set pieces for tension, which just kind of disrupted the flow of the plot rather than adding to the main goal of the story, and just long sections of kind of scrupulous details bogging down the pace of the story. Now, the sci-fi concepts and discussions were frequent and detailed, with many kind of super heady conversations had about things such as consciousness, the multiverse, the nature of time, and just so much more. It is a buffet for those who love this kind of philosophical and scientific, you know, discussion, which I absolutely do. So that was a lot of fun reading this in this book. It does make it quite a challenging read, though, in many senses, especially as some of the terminology used is different to ours, as it is this different world. So that makes it even more difficult to follow along what's going in the story. But if you are getting it, it is just absolutely fascinating stuff. I really enjoyed the sci-fi part of it. Thematically, this book kind of leans into that science and the philosophy-based questions, as I just mentioned, but it does it with real aplomb, even if it did go over my head at times. Now, for a sci-fi book, I was quite taken with several of the characters in this book. Obviously, sci-fi is often lambasted as being bad for character building, but I really liked Erasmus and his kind of close-knit group of friends. They felt realistic to me, and distinct from each other, and I just found myself really liking Erasmus and the people around them. So definitely enjoyed the characters in this sci-fi book. I think that's all I've got to say about this book, really. It is a hard one to decide how I feel on, and I think it's going to take a couple of weeks for me to fully settle on my feelings, and that for me is a great reading experience, and so therefore it gets a lot of points. And it also gets a lot of points for it being so damn unique, so different to anything I've ever read, especially that first half of the book. So I will always remember that feeling that I got in the first half of the book. Yeah, the second half wasn't that great, and it didn't particularly end amazingly well, so it's not going to be an all-timer for me. Maybe not a top 10 book of the year, I'm not sure. We'll see how the reading goes for this year. But I did enjoy it, and I am very, very intrigued to read more by Neil Stephenson. Probably the next one I'm going to read is Seven Eves, because I own a copy of that already. So that is Anathem. So I did squeeze in a couple of short stories by Ursula K. Le Guin, which I'll just quickly skirt over now. So I read Semley's Necklace, which is a sci-fi fantasy story that served as a seed to the first book in her Hainish cycle. So it was kind of, I think it's now used as the prologue to Rakonen's world. No idea how you say that. And in this story, you follow a poor princess whose main fixation is finding a family heirloom to donate to her husband, who is the heir to the throne. We traverse several areas and come into contact with many different peoples and kind of races of people, often with kind of like judgment and analysis given to these people, which kind of serves as a precursor to themes in her later books of, you know, coming across different people and how to deal with people who are completely different to you. And this book has a really fun twist at the end that serves as the main sci-fi concept, which obviously can't be talked about due to spoilers. It was a fun little read, but by no means one of my favourite short stories. The other short story I read was April in Paris, maybe my least favourite of the two, but still good, which is kind of a gothic time travel tale about several people who are brought together in one time because of their unhappiness with their lot in life. Not much to say in terms of plot. It's not a plot-focused short story, but the atmosphere was absolutely wonderful and the characters were very colourful and distinct. Now, this story basically explores the idea that there's much more to happiness in life than relentlessly pursuing career goals, which is something I can definitely relate to. So, nice little theme in this book, but I think I preferred Semley's Necklace. So now I'll just finish up by telling you what I'm planning in July, which is now. So I have started James by Percival Everett. A couple of months ago, I read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn for the first time, which I did enjoy quite a lot. And so I thought it would be a really good time to read this book, which is a retelling of the story from Jim's perspective. So I'm not very far in, I'm like 40 pages in or something, and it is interesting so far. So very happy to be reading that, and it's quite short, so it shouldn't take me too long. And the next book I'm going to read is Gardens of the Moon by Stephen Erickson, the first book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. Finally starting this series. It's been a long time coming and it is happening. I may even begin it today. I do have some time off today and I kind of want to have a nice amount of time to read this probably very heavy prologue, so I might start this today and I am definitely looking forward to reading this book. The third book that I'm definitely going to be reading this month is Philip Chase's new release of While Darkness Gathers. I have read the Adan trilogy and very much enjoyed it. This is a sequel, a short sequel to that trilogy. So I'm looking forward to seeing what Philip Chase can do in a shorter book set as a standalone. Yeah, I'm just looking forward to seeing, going back to this world and reading this nice little book. Now, I don't know how long these reads are going to take me. Obviously, Gardens of the Moon is quite hefty, or so I've heard. But the other two books are quite short, so I'm hoping there is time to slip something else in. I don't know what that's going to be yet. I want to leave that up to mood. But it's probably going to be like a short sci-fi book, or maybe The Grapes of Wrath, or something like that. Something not too long, so I can just fit another book in for the month, because that would be nice to get more than 3 for once. So that is the TBR. So that is it for today's video. As I always say, if you've made it this far into the video, I thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Let me know if you've read any of these books that I've read in June, or any of the ones that I'm going to read in July. I'd love to hear your opinions on those books. Let's have a little conversation. I always like to chat to people in the comments, but that is it. So if you liked the video, please press like. If you're new to the channel, please think about subscribing and joining my journey, but that is it for now. So I will see you in another video soon. Goodbye.